You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa.
A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
So we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches for tonight. Then that snow.
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Massachusetts.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good Thursday evening, and thank you for joining us on the Weather Junkies. I am Tyler Argianas, joining the show from the Champlain Valley alongside Dakota Smith in Colorado. And our guest for this night's podcast, Garett Argianas, joining us in Connecticut. Dakota.
Hey, Tyler. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's a stormy day in Colorado. Dry start to the week, and now it's kind of been showery and stormy every day. And really, really hot. It got into the 90s the past 2 days, mid-80s today. And the lack of air conditioning has become very, very relevant to me right now. So
you're another one without air conditioning.
Yeah, we are. And so I've been in the basement a lot of the time, like working and stuff, because that's where it's the coolest.
Is that different?
What do you mean? Oh, the normal? My desk is actually in the basement, so no, it's not different.
Okay.
But I did have kind of a weird experience this week with lightning. So I think it was on Tuesday, I was hanging up flyers for an event that we'll talk about in a little bit. And I was checking the radar just because, I knew there were showers and storms in the area. And everything looked fine. There was like a few scattered showers, nothing threatening. I was really just looking for lightning. And we're just walking down the road, scattered skies, blue sky in there. This giant bolt of lightning just out of nowhere. I pegged it as around a half a mile away, I think, because the thunder was basically instantaneous with the lightning. And I have never been so unprepared for a bolt of lightning. And it took me by surprise. I'm terrified of lightning, so I was hustling back to shelter. And there's one other bolt of lightning with that storm while I was outside. So I was terrified. It probably, nothing really happened. I don't think anyone got struck by it, but it was crazy. Blue sky lightning. It's pretty terrifying.
Well, how close was the storm?
I guess the thing about the storm is that it was just forming rapidly, so you couldn't really see it on radar yet because it was like probably a scan behind.
So you had cumulus clouds billowing up, but nothing on radar.
You're right, nothing on radar, and there was also blue sky, so it was like kind of mixed skywise, but it was really just how fast the storm grew. Yeah.
Was it a cloud to ground strike, or was it just in the cloud?
Oh, yeah, it was a CG. Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like a good time to bring in our guest who might have a comment about this. Our guest tonight is Garett Argianas. He is a broadcaster, a forensic meteorologist, a Little League volunteer, and full discretion, a good friend of mine, so I don't want to mix that up. I want to have full disclosure.
Throw me some softballs, Tyler.
But I think this is a good time to bring you in, Garett, because we talk about lightning all the time, and we're sort of preoccupied by it for our Little League tournament that we try to protect. But this is an interesting case here.
Yeah, and this is another perfect example of that bolt from the blue where, it's not raining. And in this case, gosh, the blue sky. And it's tough. Obviously, Dakota is somebody who's in the know and understands lightning, and it's a situation that can really sneak up on you very quickly.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would forecast that at a sporting event. I don't think anyone would have taken action because it wasn't really a storm yet, So
well, you're right. Well, people wait for rain. That's the problem.
or visible confirmation or thunder or something.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying that is the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to thunderstorms is waiting until the rain begins. So trying to get in that one extra hole in the golf course or maybe that next half inning in the baseball game. Obviously, this is a circumstance where there's not even a question about rain if the sun is shining. And these are the kinds of kind of random events that can really hurt people. They're just not prepared for it.
Yeah, so I'm just looking up lightning fatalities in 2017, and there have only been two. One out here in Colorado. I believe someone was riding a horse and unfortunately got struck by lightning. And then one in Florida, which I believe has the most deaths every year on average. And this person was doing construction that got struck. Both in May, so we haven't had one since May 17th. So just goes to show you can happen anywhere if you're building something or if you're on a horseback. Though I believe most do happen on beaches and golf courses for the most part.
So back to go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Tyler. That's fine. We'll get to it.
We'll get back to it. Yes, our first tweet here in the trending in the Weatherverse is a tweet from Irene Sands. She is at the AMS Broadcasters Conference in Kansas City, along with a lot of other colleagues. And her tweet says, "Best practice of different stations, same city, same colors to serve common goal. You don't promo colors, right? Hashtag AMS17BC." She has a picture of the Kansas City market, so where the conference is actually being held, and all four television stations use the same color scheme for the severe weather warnings.
Well, so what I find interesting about this is that, so it's great that markets have the same, I think that's awesome. Honestly, I think it should be a national thing, but that's kind of far down the road and tough to do. But something interesting about that is their tornado watches are orange, which is not what the National Weather Service does.
So they're unified on TV, but not with the Weather Service. Yeah,
correct.
And that's another problem is, people that then go to the Weather Service page, they're looking at the same warnings and watches, but the colors are different.
I don't think the problem has ever been worse because you also have different colors within the Weather Service.
Yes.
You've probably seen there's two accounts on Twitter, one for tornadoes and one for severe thunderstorms. And the graphics, I love the graphics. They're very modern and clean and not like the National Weather Service. But the colors are different than the official NWS colors. I think for warnings, they use red, and for watches, they use yellow, which may be the way things are going. I don't know, but it's different. It conflicts with what they do right now. So any thoughts on that? This
brings up a great point, Tyler, that we actually didn't have in our tweets for this week, but I want to throw one in here. Unfortunately, by Nate Johnson. We have two other tweets by Nate Johnson today, but he has this really great tweet about big news in the weather community. The National Weather Service has announced changes to their winter weather products, which presumably is a byproduct of the hazard simplification program that they've been doing for quite some time now. So it looks like I read this earlier and I honestly forgot the gist of it, but they're getting rid of a bunch of advisories. They're getting rid of freezing rain advisory and lake effect snow advisory. So everything's just going to be a winter weather advisory.
It's interesting what they're doing. There was some misinformation out there. I won't name the source, but they put out a lot of clickbait. They had some wrong information, but basically they're no longer going to issue a blizzard watch. That's one of the changes, but they will issue a blizzard warning. And they're still going to issue an ice storm warning, but they're not issuing, if you're correct, they're not issuing a freezing rain advisory. So they are simplifying it, but after I read that, I was like, well, wait a minute. They're not totally getting rid of everything, but they are getting rid of some things.
Yeah, they're getting rid of. So go ahead, Garrett.
And that's one of the points of concern. I mean, first of all, from a broadcast perspective, anybody in the realm, television, radio, we have the opportunity to explain what's coming. And obviously, a freezing rain advisory to me is still quite significant because that little glaze of ice can cause a lot of problems. Putting that into the same category as a winter weather advisory, which could mean a couple of inches of snow, I don't know, that causes me some concern. And I also think about from the emergency manager perspective, and those are the folks that really react to these warnings and advisories because they have to treat roads and take care of problems that may develop. And for someone who's an emergency manager, who I'd say most understand at least some level of meteorology, but there's a big difference between freezing rain and a couple of inches of snow.
I do agree. That was one thing that came to my mind, and that is some of these names are very direct and very concise, and there's no two ways about it. Freezing rain advisory is one of them. I would say it was certainly blizzard warning carries weight. I don't know in reality how much different it is than a winter storm warning, but certainly people react to blizzard warning. But you're right about the freezing rain advisory. That stands out. And if you get rid of that, it's watered down, I think.
And I recall back, almost 10 years ago, probably, there was a point where within a winter storm warning, there was a heavy snow warning and like heavy sleet warning, and they've cut some of those back. And those I was okay with, but the ice versus snow, to me, is still something that is relevant.
Maybe this has revealed that we have a bigger issue. Yeah, doesn't the UK have like a green, yellow, red system?
Yeah, they do. And I think that's something that they proposed in HAZSEMP to do. It was more of a hypothesis to say we could go this route, but let's test it with a bunch of focus groups first, and let's see what meteorologists actually want. I think getting rid of some of these descriptive products actually makes, on-air meteorologists have an important job anyways, but it makes their job even more important because then you have to parse through and really articulate what a winter weather advisory means in this case compared to maybe a different case where it's snow and not ice.
It will be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, so I thought I'd throw that in there. I think they're going to be having more hazard simplification reformats like this in the future, especially severe weather. I know they're trying to, as we talked about earlier, unify the colors. Tyler, you want to give us our next tweet here?
Yeah, the next tweet comes from Nate Johnson, and he says, Moser, it's a quote, GOES R was launched in November, becomes GOES East this November. GOES S is set for launch next spring and will become GOES West. I was surprised by that, so I retweeted it. I didn't know that we had the funding or the plan to launch the next one so soon, but that's encouraging because I know everyone wanted GOES R, and when it became GOES East, I'm sure there were some disappointed weathercasters on the West Coast. I almost said Los Angeles, but I said, let's say West Coast. But yeah, that's exciting. The whole country will be covered by the new technology by next spring. It launches, according to this, it launches next spring. But I did look at the schedule at one point, and the wait time between launch and operational gets a lot shorter when you go to the next couple satellites. It's not as long as the first one.
Yeah, I don't think it was any surprise to anyone that the GOES R became GOES East. But it is nice that, just right behind it's going to be GOES S, and then GOES West. I actually saw GOES S. That was the one I visited in Lockheed.
You visited GOES S?
Yeah, they were doing a shake test on it while I was down there.
Did they have a little thing you could sign that goes up with it?
No, they didn't. No, you couldn't bring much of anything into that room because you had to have like a bunny suit on, and you could have like no technology because they're worried that you're going to be a Chinese informant or something. So, not really, but.
You want to have our next tweet, Dakota?
Yeah, another one from Nate. Thank you, Nate, for providing all our tweets this week. He does a great job live tweeting events. In similar vein here, he tweets the history of GOES from at GOES Guy. You can follow on Twitter at GOES Guy. And it's just a chart here he tweeted out with all of the all the GOES satellites in that series, starting from 1975 when GOES 1 was launched.
That's when Garett first started in TV.
That's right. Back when there were 3 stations.
Can you imagine just one visible and one infrared operational satellite? That's crazy.
That stood out to me too. But well, I mean, you see where we were and where we are now. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, 30-second visible scans of severe weather. I love some of those products where they put together the high res time frequency of visible satellite and infrared satellite during the big severe weather events. Tyler, have you seen those? And sometimes they put lightning on top. It is eye candy for sure.
I don't think I've seen them all, but the one thing that has stood out to me, I've looked at the infrared product on the Negs Lab website, and being on TV in the morning a lot, it's challenging to diagnose what's going on. But when you look at the IR on the new satellite, it's so sensitive, and it's obviously higher. I think it's higher resolution. So it's easier to sense movement. You know, it's challenging to see the low level stuff, but it's easier now to see what's going on at night. And that's tremendous, because when you compare to the current satellite, it's like garbage.
Especially across the North Country, where there's a variety of cloud cover.
There's a lot of problems too, like a couple of observing sites. That's it. But
yeah, that's a challenge as well.
No, it seems really nice, and there's a lot of features that I'm sure we'll see later on. One of them is a lightning detector for in cloud, at least. I haven't seen preliminary non-operational lightning images, but I think that's coming.
Well, I'm sure the graphic vendors will charge extra for that.
Well, hopefully it's free online somewhere. Anyways, our next tweet comes from, guess who? WeatherDAC, Dakota Smith.
Yeah, so I want to shamelessly plug an event this weekend for anyone who's in Colorado or this area. It's Colorado Weatherfest. The local AMS group, which I'm a part of, has planned this event. There's going to be the Doppler on wheels. We're going to have drones that are used for storm chasing, which are used in the Colorado State Department of Atmospheric Science. And then a whole bunch of groups. National Weather Service in Boulder. Little Shop of Physics is going to be there. The list goes on. Should be a fun time. So if you're around, it's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Colorado State Department of Atmospheric Science. You can find the event on Facebook, or I believe there was a news article actually that was written about it in the Colorado State local paper. So check it out, please, if you're in the area.
So we're ready for the main topic, aren't we?
Yeah.
So I'm going to let Garett give us his bio, but I just want to get started by saying he's a SUNY Albany alum and started his career in Albany. So Garett, give us a little bit of a story about yourself, and start earlier on and then bring us to the present.
Well, it goes way back to when I was a little tyke. Think like many people that end up in the field of meteorology, I had an interest from a young age. And I recall, I grew up in Connecticut, and while the other kids were watching cartoons and Ninja Turtles and whatever else, I watched probably more newscasts than anything. And my mother still remembers that to this day. So I would watch the newscast, I'd watch the weather on television, and I said, that's what I want to do. And clearly I had that opportunity. So, as you guys know, obviously the background in math and science when you're in school is really important. And it took me to the University at Albany. By the way, Tyler, Penn State was one of my options in Dakota.
This is a very Penn State heavy show, so welcome.
It is. And I tell you, it was probably near the top of my list, but the Albany program stood out to me, and also they were a little more generous with their financial aid.
There's no secret about
so
that.
I made that. Yeah, and I made that decision, and had a great 4 years at SUNY Albany, and I have degrees in atmospheric science and also a degree in math. And for those who are maybe looking to get into meteorology, and I'm sure you guys have hit on this before, but it's very, very math intensive, and there's so many people that want to get into meteorology and don't realize just how much mathematics is involved. And I recall we took through differential equations, which was our last math class, quote unquote, for the meteorology major. And I had classmates that said, well, okay, now we're done with math. It's like, well, no, we still have dynamics, and it's all together. And so a lot of these programs with meteorology just lose people along the way because of the challenge with the math. The good news is, for those who mainly go into operational and the forecasting, you don't have to worry about solving those equations ever again. So that is something to keep in mind. But if you really want that bachelor's degree in atmospheric science and meteorology, you really have to be a good student in math. So, we got to that point, and I was fortunate to do an internship in the Albany market at WNYT, which is the NBC affiliate, with Bob Kovacic, who's been there probably longer than I've been alive, almost. And I also worked closely with Paul Cayano, who at that time was the weekend meteorologist. Now he's the morning meteorologist, and he's still there. And he's a SUNY guy as well. So I worked with them. And I also did a weather service internship at the Albany office, which is co-located on the university campus. So I had the experience in both of those areas. And I ended up landing a weekend morning job at WRGB with the great Steve LaPointe, who's the chief meteorologist there. And I actually started there before I graduated my senior year. So I had probably 3-4 months under my belt in television at the time that I graduated. So that was quite the thrill. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then I moved to the Hartford market and NBC, at that time, NBC 30, which is now NBC Connecticut. And, Brad Field, another wonderful mentor for me and good friend. And, Brad took me under his wing, and we worked together for a number of years, and I did the weekends and filled in during the week. And then I took a chief job at the Fox affiliate in Hartford. So I worked there for a number of years, and then ended up back at NBC for a while. And then I spent some time at News 12 Connecticut in southwestern Connecticut. And that was for a couple of years as well. So I've basically been in Connecticut, kind of bouncing around like a pinball in terms of the television world. I also do a radio broadcast during the week on WAMC, which is based in Albany. So that's a 5-day-a-week deal, and that's a large coverage area. So we can certainly talk about the difference in maybe focusing in very locally in certain markets, but also in a case like that, really looking at a broad region that extends all the way from about the New York City area all the way to where Tyler is near the Canadian border, and then off into Western New England as well. So I do that, and I also have my own business, Weather Consulting Services, where I work in forensic meteorology. So I'm sure we'll touch on that as well.
Seasoned veteran.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're starting out, and you look at some of these people in the business who, 15, 20 years in, and gosh, I'm closing in on that 20-year mark pretty quickly.
I didn't realize you started in TV before you graduated. That means your partying had to come to an end early.
Yeah, to be honest with you, there wasn't much partying in my college career. I was never really a partier in college. And, maybe if I can go back, I would have spent some more time enjoying myself versus studying a lot. But I'm not,
worked out, though. You had a 4.0.
It did, yes. Yeah, it was a grueling program, to say the least. But, one other thing I was thinking about today and talking about education and some of the mistakes that students make, at least in my opinion, not that I'm an expert in that by any means, but, I saw it with the atmospheric science courses all the time, especially with the complication with the math being involved, is that memorizing is not going to get you anywhere in these physical sciences. You have to really understand what's happening and understand how the math kind of relates to the real world. And there's just so many people that I think for years are taught just to memorize everything. But, you can memorize something, and then, of course, on the exam, it's not going to be the same question or the same derivation. So you have to be able to understand kind of the bigger picture, and that's what helps you get through, and it helps you be a better analyst and just better to be quick on your feet in the real world.
We had a professor, Dr. Neese, who's been on the show, and not everyone, but a lot of people really enjoyed his teaching. He was very thorough, and that's exactly what he did. He knew how to ask a question on an exam to make sure you knew what you were talking about and to filter out the memorizers. And it was every question in every exam. It was just
I love those exams.
Yeah, I loved them.
I really did.
I still have them. I have to dig them out. But thorough overview. Thank you for that, Garett. We wanted to have you on the show to really talk about your business and perhaps dabble in other things. But what got you interested in forensic meteorology? And it says here on your website that you started that in 2004. So what sort of perked your interest, and how did you get into that?
Well, it actually goes back to other colleagues in the broadcast realm that were doing some work. And so basically, I was asked to help somebody out because of a case that had come up. And, it was something I didn't really, I knew a little bit about it, but it wasn't something that I had really ever dabbled in much. And given the fact that I was only a couple of years out of college, and, it's good to kind of get your feet wet a little bit. But, I ended up picking up a couple of cases over the years, and then really, have tried to grow the business quite a bit in the past about 5 years or so. So you kind of start out just doing a little bit on the side here and there, and you're kind of learning. It's totally different than forecasting, but there's so many things that you learn forecasting that are applicable. So you understand how the data is collected, you understand radar. It's that similar instinct that you learn in the operational world that's very beneficial when you're dealing with these forensic cases. And, you brought up a little while ago, the kind of the sparse data network, especially in your area. And that's one of the challenges that always comes up when you're dealing with these cases, because, you may have, a handful of ASOS sites. Well, unless something happens right at the airport, you have to use your education and your experience to extrapolate and make educated estimates in terms of what the weather was at a certain location. And having said that, there was a case I did that involved an airport. So that one was probably the easiest one in terms of collecting data, and, only had to look at one point pretty much. So that was pretty cool.
What would you say is your most common situation that you deal with?
The most common situation, I would say it's the ice or winter related cases. So whether it's snow and ice, slip and fall type events, those kinds of things, those are probably the bulk of what I end up getting. But there's occasions where there's questions about maybe flooding, downpours, sun angle, wind questions. So there's other things that come into play. But, if I had to take, say, the last 5 years, I'd say easily 3/4 or maybe even a bit more, really those cases involve winter questions concerning snow and ice.
And from my understanding, the caseload fluctuates up and down, and certainly large storms result in an increase, but it's a little bit disconnected from the actual event.
It is. I by no means am I a lawyer, but you learn, of course, in dealing with these cases, and it could be a year after, it could be even a couple of years after when some of these lawsuits are filed. And there's a circumstance, in fact, that there's a case I worked on in 2014. So that was 3 years ago. And I heard from, I had the lawyer call me with a question about, a case from 3 years ago. So the case is still active. And so these things can drag out. And it's interesting because now, I think about even technology. Now that the dual pole has been active for a while, I'm actually getting to the point where it's within my time frame now. Because when the dual pole first came out, of course, the cases were earlier than that. But now I'm actually able to pull that data, and that's certainly helpful when it comes to winter weather cases.
So I actually helped a forensic meteorologist when I was in high school. It was February of 2010. I think I told the story actually on the show before, where we had 2 monster snowstorms, both putting down anywhere from 15 to 30 inches widespread. And there were a number of roof collapses from all that weight from the snow and liquid. And so what this guy had me do, Mike Mogul, actually, we had him on the show. He had me go collect snow samples from these different sites. They were actually, they were marinas because all the marina roofs collapsed and did a bunch of damage to boating. And then I melted down the snow, and then I weighed it and sent him all that data. And I don't know if you ever used it, but I was wondering if you had ever worked on a case like that from a roof collapse.
Unfortunately, my connection disconnected for about 30 seconds. So, but I heard the roof collapse. I have not. Let's see. I don't think that. I may have had one question on a roof collapse, I want to say, but it wasn't anything that really comes to mind recently.
Are there any? So what kind of cases do you get? And I guess you probably can't talk about it too much, but I'm just curious. What are some of the common things that you see?
Yeah, the bulk of them end up being winter storm related. So there sometimes are questions surrounding a storm, an ongoing storm. Questions about a lot of them end up being what people call black ice, or you have a melt and a refreeze. And but it's amazing how things come up that where the plow person puts the snow can be relevant, because days down the road, if it's on top of the hill and it melts and runs down the hill and refreezes, then it causes ice. So really that ends up being a lot of what I talk about is winter. And so the winters that, of course, feature more storms tend to bring more work. But as Tyler suggested, and it's usually disconnected by a couple of years, but that really, I tell you, a lot of the questions really do come about winter. So, trying to do work like this across the South might be a bit more of a challenge, though I would argue that there are more severe weather events in the South and hurricanes and those kinds of things. So there's some other kinds of challenges, I imagine, in different parts of the country. But around here, it's really all about winter, with just a couple of other little elements that get thrown in once in a while.
Now, how often do you have to actually appear in court?
It ends up not being super frequently. Most of the cases end up settling, and that's something I've learned, and I've had attorneys talk to me about it. So there's more likely a scenario where I may be retained on a case. I may provide a written report of some kind that does get entered, but a lot of the cases end up settling before they go to trial. Now, funny you mention that, because I was due to testify in a case last week. So arguably there's a lot of work that goes into getting ready, and there had been a deposition prior to that. So you already testified once. Obviously, the deposition, you're not in front of a jury. That's just the attorneys asking you questions. But, that's a process in itself, because you have to be prepared to know exactly what you did and justify what you did. And one of the challenges that I've come across in doing this kind of work, and I think you guys can appreciate this, is that, those of us who deal with weather on a daily basis, we just know certain things and we're educated in a certain way. And when you have attorneys who aren't really trained in meteorology, they don't always understand the science and some of the kind of the quirks, I'll say, that come with it. So that becomes one of the challenges sometimes, is trying to explain to somebody, for example, how, a 2-meter temperature, well, temperature at the ground can vary from what it is at 6 feet off the ground. Those are things that people just don't commonly know. So that becomes part of the challenge. But anyway, going back to my story. So we did a deposition. The case was going to trial, and I got to court, and it ended up settling before I had to get on the stand. So I was ready to go, had everything set, knew my methodology, had all my data ready, and it ended up settling that day. So things like that can happen. But you end up, you end up doing more of the written reports and those kinds of things, and that definitely outweighs the number of times that you actually have to physically end up going to court.
Now, let's see. You don't go to court as often as you write reports, but in your years of doing this, would you say that you have learned how to perhaps decrease your own liability I mean, if you see these cases going through, you might learn about things that probably should be done differently, or mistakes that people have made, or homeowners or business owners, and now they're getting sued.
That's a really good question. And, we are homeowners, and, it's always a situation in the winter where we make sure the driveway is cleared. We make sure our sidewalk is cleared. We make sure that we have salt ready to go to put down in case there's ice. But it's definitely something that comes to mind. And I always use that example and say, well, I've done a case where someone fell. So it's definitely something that I keep in mind. And, and it's a good recommendation to anybody responsible for maintaining property. You want to do your due diligence and make sure that you have a situation that, at least lessens the threat of somebody becoming injured. And, going out and putting some salt down might take, 5 minutes, if it's just your own house or your own sidewalk. But if you can prevent somebody from falling down, not only do you prevent injuring somebody, and some of these injuries that occur are quite devastating for people. And that's something that, you may have slipped on ice before and, banged up your arm or something like that. But there's people that have had some very serious injuries that come from these instances. So, it's a good reminder for everybody to make sure you treat your sidewalks, treat your driveways, clear the snow after the storm. And also, for the individual to be extra aware that sidewalk that looks like it's wet may actually be icy. So that's something I always keep in mind, in the winter time, just, maybe checking it to see what it really is before I, not that I'm running, but, before I step on it, but, you kind of do that gingerly walk on ice versus the regular walk you would do on something that's wet.
I think you should go on a lecture series to the nation's universities, because oh my gosh, I've been at Colorado State and Penn State, and I've traveled on some really terrible sidewalks that they maybe hadn't gotten to yet, or maybe had been covered again, especially at Penn State. Oh my gosh. They were,
come on, we're tough.
I think they're a lot better now, but back then I remember walking on like an inch of like sleet and ice, and everyone around me just falling. And I don't think anyone was seriously injured that day, but it was pretty bad. So yeah, maybe you could give them a heads up and present some of your evidence to them on why they should do that better.
Well, they have plenty of weather people to inform them there, so they shouldn't be surprised by it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, it's maybe a good way to boost business if you actually awaken people to the possibility of a lawsuit after a weather-related injury.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm not putting you in charge of the marketing department.
We've had a great conversation about forensic meteorology, but certainly there were other things we wanted to at least touch on. And we talked about lightning earlier in this show, and lightning is always a challenge when you're dealing with people outside. As you know, Dakota, we both volunteer in Bristol at the Little League Regional, and Garett does the World Series as well. And we sort of take pride in being able to bring weather information to a sporting event and provide worthwhile guidance, because I think we see a lot of times you don't have that. So that's part of the reason we enjoy being in Bristol, but it's probably like 1 out of 100 reasons. And we actually had I think we already talked about this probably a year ago, but we had a lightning plan that we developed last year, and it required basically an evacuation if lightning came within 10 miles, and we had designated safe spots if people couldn't get to their cars, and it resulted in a story in the local newspaper that we were proud of. But our goal is to improve that this year, and hopefully we can do that.
And one of the challenges that we have with the Little League facility, and this is true in a lot of public settings where people gather in the summertime, is there's a beautiful pavilion. I mean, it's a wonderful structure, but people don't understand that a pavilion doesn't provide adequate shelter when there's lightning in the area. And, I recall a case in Connecticut back, it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, at our state beach Hammonasset, where there were people huddled under a pavilion during a lightning storm. and somebody was struck by lightning, and it resulted in, at least in a broadcast setting, the ability to remind people that a pavilion's not a safe place. But one of the challenges is that no one's really taught this stuff, and it kind of boggles my mind. I mean, you would think that somewhere along the way in your K through 12 education, maybe in an earth science class where most of them have, at least some section on meteorology, beyond, reading thermometers and barometers, how about some basic tips that are relevant for people that they can use for the rest of their lives?
I agree. I mean, we deal with it all the time firsthand. Why can't we stay in the dugout? Or, well, how about we just wait until it starts raining? Even the pure belief that something is going to happen. And it's too late if you wait until a lightning bolt to hit you. But certainly it's something you see all around the country. And Major League has really taken a lot of hits on social media, at least in the meteorology community, when it comes to keeping people in the stands. But the one thing that we're not saying here is that it's certainly a greater challenge when you have 40,000 people as opposed to 7,000 or 2,000. And college football stadiums have a problem usually every year. You'll hear about something in that first month, September. But you got to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're screwed.
Yeah, and one of the points that came up in that discussion I recall last year is that, and for a lot of the colleges and with their football tickets for students, it's open seating, and people don't want to leave their seats because they have good seats. And so that's another consideration that comes into play. If I have a ticket for section this and seat this versus, well, if it's open seating and I leave, someone else is going to take my good spot. So even in terms of severe weather strategy, that's something they have to consider in those places where they have that type of setup.
So I want to change the subject here. I love event safety stuff, but I want to ask you a question that I haven't been able to ask anyone on the show, and that's, what is it like working with Tyler?
Oh man,
I expect to be paid off. Oh, Tyler's become a very good friend, and Tyler is quite a bit younger than I am, so I remember him kind of coming up the ranks at Little League, which is where I met him first. But we've worked very closely on a lot of projects for Little League over the years, and I hope that I hope I've been a good mentor in terms of advising Tyler on his pursuits in meteorology, and also in the broadcast realm, because certainly we've had a lot of discussions about that as well. But it's developed into a very good friendship.
You passed, Tyler.
I passed. I'm still on the show, so I'm glad I passed.
Well, it is your show.
Let's see here. The only other thing that I wanted to get your opinion on is the state of the weather media. And I didn't say television because I wanted to include social media and TV in any way that weather information is distributed. But what is your vibe in 2017? How are you feeling?
I would say uneasy. It's probably a good word. I started television in 2001, and this is the point where most stations had a website, but it was more an afterthought than anything else. And I don't think most executives really understood what was going to become of the online world. Boy, look at all the changes. So I think that TV news is going to be around for a while. And I will say that there's really no app at this point or any real other service that can deliver the weather in the format we see it in television. So, consider that, you can open up an app, it'll tell you partly cloudy and 75, or you can read the weather service text forecast. But for someone to tell you the weather story about what's going to happen over the next few days and really hone in on the impacts of storms, or weather events. I think that's really important. And that's something that, I'm watching a lot of the tweets coming from the AMS broadcast conference, and I'm seeing that they're really putting a lot of focus on communication, which is a critical aspect of what we do as meteorologists, because, a lot of these apps, people don't really know how to interpret them, especially this time of year. I mean, hour by hour, it's showing a thunderstorm every hour from, 1 in the afternoon till 8 o'clock at night. Obviously, you'll see the broadcast on TV saying, oh, there's a chance of a passing thunderstorm sometime during the afternoon, but much of the time is going to be dry. So we're not at the point where the technology is able to really tell the story in the same way, and it doesn't have that human touch. But I tell you, I mean, I think we all see that ratings across the board in terms of the broadcast affiliates are down, viewership is down, demographic data isn't quite as good as it was. And so I think that it's going to be around for a while, but, I highly recommend that, especially if you're still in school or looking at career options, that you definitely look at some backup plans, because TV is just, it's not what it used to be. It used to kind of be the golden age, and they were stable jobs that paid quite well. But, the day of the, 30-year veteran doing the weather, it's probably gone by the wayside at this point.
The thing that I always bring up is millennials. So millennials are a talking point all the time.
Here we go. Blame the millennials.
The millennials, they always cause problems. And the millennials, do they have time? Do they value? Do they even seek out a customized forecast or a video forecast or something that comes from a legacy brand? Or are they totally okay with, say, the native app on the iPhone that's made by Apple and has the weather company data? Are they okay with that? Do they want more than that? And, a couple of vendors out there have apps that they market to TV stations, and they want TV stations to buy the app and then put their logo on it and then spit out the same data that everyone else has. Do millennials specifically seek that out, or are they fine with what just gets put in front of their face? I think that's a big question that's not being tackled.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I don't have any data to support any claims when it comes to that, but you're definitely looking at a generation that was raised in the digital age. So, I go back, even when I was in high school, I mean, you had your modem or something. It's just so different. I mean, I got to college and we had Ethernet cards and a T1 line, and it was, a big deal. And so, when I grew up, I didn't have that type of access to technology, but, I think that, some of it, I think, comes from, if you're raised in a home where, the family's still viewing a newscast, you may still look at that as an option. But, I mean, there's no question the phone is more convenient. It's fast. It's right there. And I laugh, we have the Amazon, the Echo. I won't say the A word so that everyone's little things don't light up, but because it happens when they do it on TV.
Oh my gosh.
But there's so many times I'll just ask the weather because I want to know what the temperature is, and it's easier than sitting at the computer and pulling up surface plots.
I do the same thing, but with my phone, I'm not going to get the critical information from my phone. What, like warnings and stuff like that. But I will just look at it for quick look at if it's cold or warm or what I need to wear that day.
Yeah, and it's it's a challenge across the board because you get the information you want, but I think about where things are going to go because you talk about this move into impact-based communications with weather, and how that's gonna there's gonna be a point where the technology does this stuff, and the other point that I would like to bring up, and I don't know if you guys watch on the Weather Channel, Dr. Shepard, was it Weather Geeks or whatever they call that show?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I apologize, I forgot the name, but Dr. Lance Bozart was my advisor in college at the University at Albany, and he was on the show. I think it was last week or the week before. And one of the topics they brought up on the show is that, Dr. Bozart, right, well, I call him Lance, but he wrote a paper, I believe it was a paper back in the early 2000s that said, there's going to be a point where the computer modeling is so good, we're not going to need people anymore. And that should be a concern of anybody who's in this field or going into the field, that, we're still on average better than the computers. And I would like to say after 15 plus years that I can look at a couple of maps and have a pretty good sense of what's going on and how things are going to play out. Just from education, from experience, and there's that level of instinct that comes with working with weather data, on a frequent basis. But that is another thought. We're going to get to a point where, the horsepower of these computers continues to ramp up, and there's going to probably be a point in time where the modeling is very good. So what's that do for those in the operational world? I think that's relevant. The other thing I think about, and this kind of goes back to the broadcast realm a little bit, but the fascination with snow maps. If I were a social scientist, I would study this, because that's all everybody ever asks is how much snow are we going to get? But think about the relevant questions such as what time will the snow start? How heavy will the snow be? Will it accumulate quickly enough that the plows aren't going to be able to clear it? These are all things that are relevant. And, I kind of will say tongue in cheek, but there's, I think, a reality to it. Whether you get 8 inches of snow or 10 inches of snow, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It's more about when it starts and what the impacts are. And, I think about these, couple inches that, might fall at 6 a.m. Look at all the chaos that causes. So this is where the communication side of the broadcast realm becomes very important, because people might look at that and say, oh, it's only 2 inches, I'm not worried about it. Well, 2 inches during rush hour, when there's cars all over the road, the plows can't do their job, and some of the worst incidents occur from these quote unquote small events.
Hit the nail on the head. SnowMap is one of the few weather things that does well on Facebook, but Facebook is a swamp.
It is.
It changes all the time, and it's just a wreck. But anyways, you sort of answered the question. The last question we usually end the podcast with is, what sort of advice would you have to anyone interested in going into meteorology or currently studying meteorology? We've already touched on a number of points, but anything you could add in that regard?
Yeah, I think I hit most of my points. Definitely, just try to stay ahead of technology. I think that's something that even for me, and I've been out not even 20 years yet, and look at how technology has changed in terms of the broadcast world, in terms of the weather world. So, be aware of the potential changes coming with that in regards to whether it's smartphones or something else, but also that I mentioned what Lance Bozart brought up with the computer modeling, and don't be a memorizer. I want to make that point again. Make sure you understand and embrace it, and you want to be curious. You don't want to just know it to pass the test or try to pass the test. You want to have curiosity about the subject, and whether it's meteorology or anything else that you're doing, you learn something along the way, and never stop learning.
Never stop learning. I love it. Garett, thanks so much for joining us tonight and talking about a wide variety of topics. I feel like we hit a lot of things there. So that was a really fun chat. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good to do it.
Where can people find you on the internet?
Okay, they can check me out my website, which is WeatherCS for weatherconsultingservices.com. So weathercs.com. I'm also on Twitter at Garett Argianas. You guys can tweet out because I don't want to spell it, but you can put that out on the Twitter feed as well. So those are the best places to get me.
What about Snapchat?
Not yet, Tyler.
Okay, not yet. I'll back off.
That's a little That's a little bit of a back and forth on Snapchat.
No, I encourage you to check out weathercs.com. It is a very aesthetically pleasing website, good information, and you can learn more about Garett there.
Thanks again, Garrett, for joining us. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow us at the WX Junkies. We're also on Facebook. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or pretty much any podcast platform. And if you're listening right now, go ahead and give us a rating or review, please. We'd love to hear from you and love to see your comments. That's going to do it for tonight. Tyler, who can we expect next week and the week after that?
Next week, we're excited to have Steve Fundero on the show. He is a fellow Penn State grad. He lived the California life for a couple of years, and we want to learn about that and a little bit about what he's doing now. And we'll have him next week. And the following week, we're excited to have Ali Keslek on the show from the National Weather Service. So the next 2 weeks are booked. We're excited for the next two, but for this week's edition of the Weather Junkies, that is all. On behalf of Dakota, Garrett, and myself, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us right back here next week.
Cal, I gotta go, Julia. We got cows.